Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for G&T's first NextGen webinar. I'm Nancy Elgarf, G&T NextGen Champion and Associate Director, and I'm excited to be moderating today's session. G&T is an independent, multidisciplinary consultancy firm across all sectors of the built environment, including project management, cost consultancy, and facilities management across the UK and the US. Here at G&T, and especially given the current circumstances, we firmly believe in supporting the next generation of industry leaders. We're proud to continue to work with our NextGen partners to provide a platform for discussion and debate. Today, we've been kindly joined by speakers from our NextGen industry partners, New London Architecture, City Property Association, Westminster Property Association, and REVO Hub to get their perspectives on how they think the industry should respond to the current pandemic. The next generation will have to live with the outcome of the pandemic and the repercussions it has on the future of the work during a key period in their careers. So today we want to discuss what the next gen want to see from the future of the industry and what opportunities they think there will be to focus on when life returns to the new normal. So without further ado, I'll hand over to our speakers to introduce themselves. Should we start with you, Selasi?
Yeah, sure. My name is Selasi Setufe. I am based at BeFirst, which is Welcome Diagram's wholly owned development company. And I am managing the Innovative Sites Programme, which is a small sites programme, and also doing some design management as part of our work in BeFirst.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is James Burrage. I'm the chair of the Westminster Property Association NextGen Committee, and I also work for Great Portland Estates. I'm a development manager there, so I'm responsible in delivering some of our developments throughout London. I currently have a project that's nearing completion in Whitechapel, which has been a challenge given the current circumstances, but we're getting there slowly. And I'm also looking at some of our pipeline assets and what we do with them in the future.
Afternoon, everybody. Hi, my name's Alex Beale, and I'm Foresight Manager at Landsec. We're a UK-focused real estate investment developer and landlord, and I'm responsible for guiding strategic decisions and distilling long-term cultural, societal, and economic shift. And I've been part of the CPA NextGen for about 2 years, and I'm currently the vice chair.
Thanks. And Nick?
Hi there, I'm Nick Strachan, director at Leslie Jones Architects. Our practice dates back over 50 years now. We were historically founded on retail and leisure design, delivering numerous UK shopping centres. And in more recent years, we've evolved and our agenda has shifted into a much more comprehensive urban mixed-use urban design portfolio. In particular, we're looking at regeneration projects in a number of towns and cities across the country. And we're finding that a unique knowledge in the operation of the ground plane and of retail placemaking, combined with town centre living and a diversifying portfolio in town centre design, creating some really interesting and innovative master plan and redevelopment opportunities. On the side, I was chair of the REVO Hub for the last few years, which is REVO's NextGen, focused on innovation and future thinking. And I also sit on the REVO Strategic Board.
Thanks, Nick. Before we start the session, I just want to quickly run through some housekeeping. You've all probably used Zoom before, but if not, you'll all have joined muted and with your videos off. We've already received a few questions before the forum, and so we'll begin with these and then open up the discussion to the floor at the end. The Q&A, however, is open throughout, so if you have any questions, we'd encourage you to put them there, and there'll be a dedicated Q&A session at the end where we'll answer these. So, I guess with individuals now working from home more successfully before, what long-term impact might this have on London as we know it? Selasi, shall we start with you?
Yeah, sure. So I believe that there'll be more demand and more concern about the quality of our homes and the provision of adequate space standards, good quality internal conditions in our houses, i.e. good quality ventilation, natural daylighting, etc., as well as good internet connectivity is very, very important. If my internet jerks around, it's because my internet's not that great. Yeah, and I think those are some really important things that people are going to be being concerned about at the moment.
Nancy, can I jump in on that one as well?
Please do.
I think what Selasi just said of housing is obviously quite true of office property as well, and business places. I think people are going to be as concerned about those things in the place that potentially they will spend a lot more of their time. Obviously, there's obviously the trend of greater flexibility is likely to kick in as well. So I think A, the quality of the workspace is going to have a greater focus on it, and B, we're going to need to make sure that we can all get good Wi-Fi, regardless of where you are.
I think from my perspective, there is a fundamental change in our views on distance, segregation, and touch, and I think it's these are not just the practical measures in limiting the spread of the virus now, but there's going to be a fundamental shift in the psychology of people and their views on human comfort zones and what is an appropriate space for us to occupy. One of the sort of big knock-on effects on this, I think, will perhaps be a sort of review on how we look at public versus private space and the interaction between the two. James just suggested flexibility is obviously key here, be it for a future pandemic or even the fear of one. But I think there are procedures which will start to come into place where we switch seamlessly between public, private, and perhaps create a more semi-public type of space. For example, we're looking at a regeneration project which is looking to create historic garden squares. These are sort of evocative of the historic garden squares in London. So these are semi-public green spaces that can switch between public and private accordingly. And I think this kind of theme about segregation, about designating public spaces, separating exercise space from dog walking space, for example, is going to become increasingly prevalent in how we procure and deliver urban realm and spaces between buildings.
Definitely. Alex?
Yeah, just to build on that, I think fundamentally, we now know that working remotely really works. I think more companies and more people have had to adopt it. And I think that's meaning it's becoming a really credible long-term option, like shopping. Shopping online has already proven. I think the challenge for our industry is that a 10 to 15% occupancy rate that's widely reported in offices at the moment is just not sustainable. And I think the challenge comes that people have really enjoyed working remotely, or certain aspects of it anyway. Like, a lot of people have saved money, and people have definitely saved time not commuting. They've managed to spend more of that time with their family. And I think companies that will want to attract the best talent are going to have to continue to meet those demands and maintain a lot of those benefits that people have felt. There's a stat that only about 40% of knowledge workers' time is spent at their desk. And I think increasingly, having gone through the pandemic, I think people's working patterns and therefore companies' real estate strategies are going to have to reflect that more and more. And there's potentially going to be an acceleration of workplaces becoming a place where people come together while allowing solo work to happen elsewhere, either at home or remotely. And I think there's got to be more discussion between landlords and tenants to work that out. I also think there's kind of the wider challenges of the whole city ecosystem that rely on office workers coming in from, what the impacts might be on the transport system, what the impact's going to be on the F&B and hospitality sectors. So it'll be interesting to see what comes next. I think one big positive is that cities have had to improve their pedestrian routes. We've seen more people cycling, restaurants taking up lots of outdoor space for socialising. I think all of those are some great positives that hopefully we'll be able to harness into the long term.
Thanks, Alex. You sort of noted the point about acceleration, and I guess during the pandemic, we've seen that there's been quite a big change to businesses and the requirements, and they've had to accelerate certain processes or changes that they were going to implement over a longer period of time, with people having to think differently in order to reimagine that change. Do your businesses have any examples of how you've potentially followed that through? James, can I start with you?
Yeah, sure. I think, I guess there's 2 points that I could comment on that. The first, I think, is building on what Nick was saying about procedures. We've had to adapt and change and provide procedures for all of our buildings throughout our portfolio. Essentially, we've got a playbook per asset, which is aimed at getting people back into the workplace. However densely they choose, that's obviously down to them. So there's been a massive adaptation, both thinking about the public transition into the building and then within the building itself. So that's obviously been one change. I think the other one is that people are already we were already working more flexibly before COVID came along. We all know that. It's definitely been accelerated by COVID-19, but we see that continuing, that trend continuing. We've got a product that we've been developing over the last 5 years or so, which is essentially a fitted out workspace. We call it Flex Plus, and it offers quite a few attractions to occupiers, which I think will be more attractive to more people post the pandemic. Principally, it's reducing their capex outlay. It gives them the ability to flex up and down in terms of their space requirements in a fairly non-committal way, and also opens up shorter lease terms or more flexible lease terms. So obviously people can react quicker in response to pandemics or to other business driving decisions. So I think the change we've seen with that, saying we were already providing that space, but we were fitting out 5,000 square foot floor plates or below. We think we probably expect to see some demand in bigger floor plates coming through for some big occupiers who are looking for that flexibility. So that's an area that we're focusing on at the moment.
Great, thank you.
I think just adding to that, it's not just the changes that we're going to see actually in the workplace. I think it's how we get to and from the workplace and what that holds. We can do a bit of crystal ball gazing, but we don't know how society is going to adapt to this. It's generally socially and economically appropriate now that we come in by public transport. Indeed, with sustainability increasingly on everyone's agenda, this is an appropriate trend, but this brings a serious contradiction when you then consider everything we've just said about social distancing, and people are demonstrating that the public may not be as comfortable in this post-viral society and coming in on buses and trains in the same way. So how will transport adjust? Will people just change as and when they use public transport? Will services start to look for smaller carriages, more buses per hour, designated safe zones on trains and buses? I think also, there is a trend towards private sustainable transport technology, but will we see a surge in bikes, personal electric vehicles, etc.? So, I'm not saying we have any answers yet, but these are definitely going to be increasingly important.
Yeah, I agree with lots of those points. I also think it's interesting to monitor or to kind of notice the one with the theme around kind of businesses taking responsibility to do the right thing, and how that has kind of been accelerated or evolved over the past few months. I think certainly at Landsec it's been a reflection about kind of the role we play in supporting the community, the kind of customers that we work with alongside, and our own workforce as well. There's just like a couple of examples. The rent relief fund of £80 million, which has gone to our customers which are most in need, and a £500,000 fund which has gone to our charity partners. I think both those things kind of reflect that acceleration of kind of a reflection on what the responsibility of big business is in society. And then with our workforce, I work remotely, as a lot of my colleagues did for kind of part of the week or part of the day, and that transition to us all having to work remotely all the time was pretty smooth. We had already been working on the cloud, so that works pretty well. I think what is going to be interesting over the next few months is kind of how the transition works of some people working in the office and some people working remotely, which I think could be more tricky than kind of the clear-cut boundaries of everyone remote and all meetings being online. So it'll be interesting to see how Landsec and every company tackle that problem going forward.
I think I'll definitely jump onto the back of what Alex has just said, in that I think a lot of flexibility is required going forward, and more so than ever, flexibility in terms of providing people options as to what's best suited for them. And this is in terms of the workplace and employees providing employers sort of enough flexibility and being responsive to where different people are at. I think it's important to recognize that different people have different situations. So one employee might have, be living with an elderly person with complex health needs, which means that they're inherently against maybe socializing or being in contact with people in a different way than a next employee might actually not be in an adequate situation to be working from home effectively. And I think those two different sorts of, well, there are many examples and many varying examples of where different solutions would be necessary. I think that also applies to the different locations of businesses. London, as a sort of very busy, sort of centralized space for business and working spaces, I think would probably need to be rethought or reimagined to some degree. I think where people are having to commute long distances and to come into the center of London to work, there might be scope to have more satellite sort of office spaces that may allow people to commute more sustainably to those spaces, rather than congregating in the central location all of the time, maybe some of the time, but not all of the time. I think there's also scope to sort of monitor who needs to be in an office space and who can work remotely. But then there's also the sort of social element to it all. And obviously there's something about working in an office environment, being able to go and speak to your colleagues. And I think if anything is missed, I quite enjoy working from home, but if anything is missed during this time, it's that element of, I have a question, quickly being able to go over to a colleague or passing a new colleague or something. Having that intersocial interaction is missed, and it'll be interesting to see how we overcome that. But yeah, I think it's all about being flexible and being responsive to different solutions. Yeah, I don't think it's a one size fits all thing, especially when it comes to commuting. The idea of cycling into work can work in some locations, but it's not viable at all in, say, some outer London boroughs, and how that impacts different social classes and the rest. So yeah.
No, it's a really good point. It's kind of the flexibility option to be allowed to work from home, but also to be able to be collaborative and creative is a topic I'm sure we'll all be discussing for quite a long time, on how to make it be the perfect scenario, so to speak. And your point as well about people wanting to come together, whether it's in a leisure environment or a work environment. And Alex, you noted earlier about the retail sector and how we've all been changing our kind of normal purchasing habits throughout the pandemic, so probably taking on some of them for the long term compared to what we would have normally done. We've seen that COVID-19 has had a huge impact on the retail sector, but what do you think are the long-term implications that this might have on the future of shopping and leisure?
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic, I think. And I think, well, we've already seen over the past few years kind of a massive amount of change in the retail sector, a huge amount of administrations, and then recently kind of reduction in space from stalwarts of the kind of British retail sector like Boots and John Lewis. And I think the road ahead is definitely tricky. There's been an uptick in the number of young claimants for the universal credit, and the furlough scheme winding down over the next few months. I think those are going to have really big impacts on retail, hospitality, on leisure. Having said that, I think there are some retailers that have done really well as well. So ones that focus on the home, as Selasi was saying earlier. So plant sales, for example, have gone up quite a lot, and companies like Peloton, which bring exercise and kind of well-being into the home, those kind of companies have done really well. And another interesting shift has been that 1 in 10 Britons has undertaken a subscription during lockdown. So many of those companies have been for food and drink. I think lots of people are going to carry on buying things in that kind of way, and that really changes what the role of the retail store is for. It's increasingly important to drive people to online sales, and it becomes the role of the store to kind of monitor what the impact of online sales is rather than sales in the store itself. And that fundamentally changes what the relationship is between the retailer and the landlord. And you know, we've seen examples of discussions in the press of turnover rents becoming the norm, potentially, to have a kind of more equal share in what the risk and reward of opening physical retail is. So I think, yeah, there's definitely kind of more turbulence ahead, I'd say. There's some retailers that are gonna continue doing really well, and it's those that can adapt and innovate and kind of evolve what their stores and physical stores can do that are gonna really succeed, I think.
Can I just jump in there? I mean, I think from a sort of built environment perspective, coronavirus will undoubtedly lead to vast swathes of retail real estate needing to be repurposed, along with many other types of buildings and spaces. But I think it's really important to go back to what I think James may have mentioned earlier. The structural challenges that have led to this have been known for many years. It's just the lockdown has accelerated this shift. You know, from my standpoint, it's really important to highlight that successful redesign of these places and spaces should be for both the existing communities who are using these towns and cities, whether it's to shop or to work or to live there, but also it should be capable of accommodating the needs of the future generations. And when we talk about long-term strategies to, you know, in the wake of COVID, we must be focusing on Gen Z, who, you know, many of you listening in today, you know, they've been champions of many of these trends for many years. You know, a less of a demand for ownership, more rental, you know, looking towards flexible working, often being self-employed, you know, a complete comfort in digital socializing, online interaction, and less dependence on car and more about sustainability and environmentally focused lifestyles. And I think fundamentally to retail, Gen Z's leadership in the adoption of e-commerce has been, you know, which has seen such a surge through COVID, has really led people to question the function and content of these towns and cities even sooner. But my point is, this was happening. This was a trend. This isn't a revolution. It's been an evolution for a while.
If I could add to, I think what both Alex and Nick have said there, absolutely, it's been happening for a while. And I think what we need to see change, and what hasn't changed quick enough or hasn't adapted, is how we can capture the sort of adaptation and creativity that our retailers, whether they're F&B or leisure or just normal sort of retail, how they have adapted over the last 5 years, but also in face of the COVID pandemic as well. And what we're not seeing is a facilitation of that adaptation through the planning system. Now, there was proposal put to Parliament yesterday to bring in relaxations to permitted development. We will see where that gets to, but it's certainly a step in the right direction in terms of opening the debate on it. But at the moment, I think our high streets are suffering, and we need to have measures that are put in place to help them. And that's principally going to be through the planning perspective.
Yeah, these you know, this acceleration has suddenly happened. What has been holding these places back is an uncertainty, a sort of a desperation to hold on to whatever little income these high streets still have. And actually, I think in a way we need to look at this as a positive opportunity in time, that we can readdress some of these challenges which we've kind of haven't really been confronting full on over the last few years. And, you know, here we have a chance to totally rethink our town centres and almost right the wrongs of previous years. You know, where we have totally relied upon a department store and a traditional anchor high street retail model, let's consider new rich mixtures of uses that are appropriate for the generations of people who want to be living, working, playing in these places. You know, I think it's a potentially a bold new era of regeneration, both in towns and cities, and in other, you know, inevitably there will be a drive to, you know, accommodate suburban areas. And, you know, how do we apply kind of urban uses to some of those areas in a way that is appropriate, green, well scaled?
I think you made quite a number of very important points there. I think this idea of looking to the future generations to help inform what we start to action now, I think is incredibly important. And I don't think there's enough of that going on at the moment. And it needs to be something that is sort of crossing across different sectors. So it needs to go from the retail sector informing the planning system and informing the built environment sector and vice versa. And all of that needs to be dictated by sort of an ultimate agenda and aim and objective to making sure that everything that's being developed is has in mind the people ultimately who are going to be using it. And I think we don't do enough of that. We're too used to sort of look into the status quo and just looking to the past or the present and just trying to make existing systems work when fundamental changes are happening, and we kind of need the pace of change to catch up to the pace of change that's happened in the way people live their lives and the way future generations are living their lives. The e-commerce thing is an example, but there's always a balance to be struck. And I think we always need to look to the future and understand what our population is made up of. Yes, we have a lot of younger people now. What are those younger people? How are those younger people going to be using sort of the commerce space, whether in physical high streets or online? What are they going to be needing now and in the future? But then what are, you know, our Asian population needing now and in the future? And what's going to happen to those future generations as they age? I think it needs to be sort of a more holistic view and to move us closer to, you know, a better situation and better solutions for the retail sector and our high streets, etc.
It's a really interesting point, and you've all touched on it in terms of how people are adapting to the new methods for carrying out certain everyday tasks and having to adapt away from, as you say, the status quo. And we've seen during lockdown, for example, things like virtual planning sessions and meetings have been happening. And I guess with that in mind, the sort of the digital revolution that has come through the last few months, what developments do you believe are coming through into the industry that will be for the better? Selasi, it would be good to hear a bit more about that because you might have had an interaction on the planning side as well.
Unmute myself. Yes. Yeah, I've been hearing from my colleagues at BeFirst that actually some of the planning procedures that have happened through digital means have been a lot more efficient than, you know, how they've done them in the past in person, which is interesting. I don't know if people are willing to continue in that way, or if it's just something that's acceptable for now. I don't know if people would want to go back to the old system, even if it's felt that the newer way of doing things now, or the temporary new way of doing things now, is more efficient. That's it. That would be interesting to kind of see, but it would also be interesting to see the effects sort of all the way through. Okay, we're having these digital planning sessions now, planning applications and all those things now. Is the result of those digital sessions going to be as good or better in terms of the built result? That's yet to be determined, isn't it? So that will be interesting to monitor. All of the things that come out of, you know, the other side of this period that we're in. Yeah, I think there's so much space for innovation in terms of the digital space in this period, and how that evolves into sort of the built environment. It will be very interesting to see as well, whether it's, you know, less need for touching things like elevators. How do we go about that if someone's going to be in there, having to be in there cleaning down the elevator like after every person uses it? How are we going to navigate those types of systems? That will be interesting to see.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we'll definitely see some interesting innovations with technology. Just to build on that, I think what's interesting is kind of more companies and more demographics within those companies have had to adopt collaborative technology. And there's been a productivity deficit growing in this country for a while now. And I think as more people have to use collaborative technology, that could really accelerate any gains in productivity. And I think innovative companies that can adapt will be those that succeed. And I think people who keep their skills up to date are going to be the people that succeed as well. And I wonder if those people in leadership who have kind of been exposed over the last few months to the challenges of childcare alongside working, I imagine there'll be some innovative solutions that come from mixing, childcare, education, reskilling alongside the workplace in the future. And then, secondly, I think we've seen buildings at the heart of our cities sit empty for months, and I think there's a big opportunity for whoever can make use of that space more efficiently, more effectively, and potentially even kind of more democratically as well. And I think one example is dark kitchens expanding as more people get deliveries. They offer a really interesting example of how you can make use of previously underutilized space. And then I think the last thing I wanted to touch on was that someone said earlier, just jogged my memory about as economic uncertainty at the moment is kind of everywhere and predicted to kind of continue to be around. The more drastic measures are becoming more mainstream. Like, for example, last week some MPs tabled a motion or wrote a letter to Rishi Sunak about a 4-day working week, and that kind of discussion's been moving into the mainstream. And I think that as a potential economic stimulator and other policies like it could have a really huge impact on our sector in particular. So just to bring it back to the question, I think any company that can innovate and adapt in these kind of drastic economic and legislative climate are going to be the ones that are able to succeed.
Yeah, I think I'd just add to that. I think in line with Alex's comment, that innovation culture is now it's a cultural element of the business now. I think if businesses are set up to think innovatively, then they will adapt quickly and hopefully progress things too. And I guess an observation, I don't have any answers about or predictions particularly about what bits of technology are going to innovate and change our lives, but I think it's quite interesting looking back and seeing what the current circumstances are doing to some of the things that we've already seen come through. So I mentioned our project in Whitechapel, which is completing shortly, right at the beginning in the intro, and that's going to be GPE's sort of most technologically advanced building when it delivers. Now, lots of different interpretations of what a smart building is. This one does lots of things it allows you to access without touching any buttons, which is obviously retrospectively quite a good thing. We've got sensors on every floor, which allows us to map occupation and also to monitor air quality. So obviously retrospectively, those things are going to be really attractive, but for a completely different reason for what they were put in there in the first place. So I think that rate of change is so fast, and particularly when we can see the adaptability of what we've already done, it's going to continue to accelerate post or during and post pandemic.
It's very interesting. I was going to say, oh, go on, Nick.
No, I was just going to end James's point. This idea of multifunctional space. Again, there are some really great examples over the last few years. I often quote things like the Chester Story House, Catford Mews down in South London. These are both community, cultural, retail mixtures. In both those cases, they're retrofitting buildings. I think when we talk about innovation, it's very easy to suddenly think, oh, technology is the answer. but actually social innovation is as important. And I think what this has given us is a point in time to readdress the way we use these buildings, the way we use our public spaces. And it has all sorts of knock-on effects. You know, at the core of it, there's a sustainability element to this. You know, if we want our town and city centres to remain appropriate, they need to be flexible. They need to be ever-changing. They need to be able to, you know, move with whatever the market is asking them to be. And I think that, you know, this is a really sort of pertinent moment in time for us to sit back and assess some of these opportunities.
I was going to say, you're literally taking the words right out of my mouth there, Nick. I was going to pivot and ask about how people felt that the future of climate change and environment was going to be impacted following the pandemic. You know, we've seen this kind of forecasted scenario of we can't repair our world anymore, go to actually it might be repairable. And I guess I'd like to pick on you maybe, Nick, to follow that through a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I heard someone describe it as post-viral urbanism, but this idea that, you know, how are we going to be designing towns and city centres? I mean, let's start, you know, I think it is agreed that town and city centre living, you know, particularly amongst the Generation Z we're talking about, will be on the up. It seems a logical way to deliver density in, you know, the appropriate places. You know, for example, to avoid building on a green belt. You know, I think there are many advantages to living in a town and city centre. But what this is providing us with is saying, you know, challenging how we do that to deliver a place that is quality, that enhances well-being, is sustainable. And there are some obvious challenges about private amenity I mentioned before. You know, I think the main issue we have is, you know, in being long-term sustainable, you need to provide places that are flexible and people want to be in the future. And an obvious way to do that would be, hey, let's make flats and apartments bigger. But hey, without a substantial drop in the cost of land, that just isn't going to be viable. So we've got to think of other innovative ways of doing this. And there are some fantastic models. If you go over to the continent, the Bosco Verticale in Milan, Jean Nouveau's Cyprus Tower, these are phenomenal high density buildings with balconies, with green spaces, vertical gardens, sort of inherent sustainability and drivers for well-being. And, you know, going right back to earlier conversations, I'll be really intrigued to see how this is picked up in planning processes. Is it just a qualitative kind of suggestion, hey, let's have lots of green roofs and lots of green buildings? Or will there be assertive moves? You know, we have housing design guidelines which talk about the space that one person needs to dwell. Will we start talking about how much amenity and green, how much biophilia that, you know, individuals need? So I think these could be some really, you know, really great opportunities to kind of bring in sustainability and well-being at the core of some of our projects.
Thanks, Nick. Does anyone else want to pick up on that point as well?
Yeah, I'll chip in if that's all right. I think it's been really interesting over the past few months to see the kind of drastic collective action the world can take when faced with an imminent threat. And I think I think that's a good sign that, you know, that change can be quite rapid and widespread to address things like hopefully climate change in the future. However, on the other side of that coin, I think I heard a political commentator a few weeks ago talking about the fact that there's concern that do legislators, do companies have the bandwidth to deal with a pandemic, an economic threat, and the climate change problem? And, you know, another issue that I've kind of come across in the past few weeks and months is the suggestion that going back to cars to commute is a short-term solution. But on the other hand, then I think, you know, we've seen an enhanced interest in outdoor space. Bike shops have been sold out of bikes, and cities have had to adapt their kind of public realm really drastically, which I think is really positive. And then for our industry, it's something like 85% of building stock that will exist in 2050 already exists today. And that means there's a huge opportunity from a sustainability perspective in making the most of that embodied carbon, and the companies that can adapt and repurpose and reuse existing building stocks, there's a massive opportunity for. And then on top of that, it's not just about environmental sustainability, but kind of societal demands for transparency, and for the ethics behind kind of the whole life of brands, of products, and supply chains. And I think it's a good sign that the ethical investment is on the rise, especially from a younger demographic who obviously got a vested interest in improving the planet. So I think there's positive signs, definitely.
I would also like to jump in if you don't mind. I think first off, the local authorities have a big sort of power here, especially local authorities like mine, Barking and Dagenham, who have through BeFirst taken on sort of quite large regeneration programs. And I think on the back of some of what Alex is saying with regards to building stock that already exists, but also the building stock that is being built at the moment, I think it's very important that the climate agenda is at the forefront of a lot of those, of all of that development actually, because that's going to be, stock that's going to be in existence for the next 50 to 100 plus years. And we need that to, meet the demands of current and future generations, and it needs to be sustainable. I think we all have to take as drastic and dramatic as COVID-19 has been globally, and our response to that globally, locally and globally, that's as drastic as we need to be in combating climate change issues, and particularly from our industry, the built environment industry. I think it needs to be sort of broadly accepted that anything being built, anything being refurbished has to hold sustainability at its core, in order that we can achieve what Nancy said in the lead into this question, that thing of actually now we can do something about climate change. It's not going to happen if we revert back to our old ways of doing things. I also think that this just allowing people to that thing of it, if can the government deal with climate change as well as the pandemic, as well as other economic issues? I think it needs to be seen less as siloed issues, but more as intersectional issues that are all webbed and tangled in together, and that dealing with one and ending up causing more issues or exacerbating issues for the other is not acceptable. And we need to take an approach where we're sort of thinking sort of multidimensionally and responding to all of these different issues in tandem, because they have a big knock-on effect on each other.
Can I just say I wholeheartedly agree with you, Selasi.
I was just about to say exactly the same thing. I think it was a very good point and well made, Selasi. And I think for me, it's quite an easy thing to sum up. And if you talk about climate change and sustainability, which all goes together, if you consider it a race, there's no individual winner or a loser. We either all win or we all lose. So everybody has to come together. We've got to be able to deal with a pandemic and decarbonising the economy at the same time. We can't just sort of say, oh, we'll pick one up later once we've dealt with the other. And that absolutely requires cross-party collaboration on every level, and also businesses working together as well. There may be a short-term competitive advantage, but in the long term, we've all got to get there together.
There's some really thought-provoking points there that you've all made. It's all about collaboration and, as you said, working together, and how we can kind of try and engage in positive steps forward. And I guess before I go on to my last few questions, I'd like to actually take on some of the Q&A ones that we've had, because they've been really interesting points. One we've had through is, how will we develop our graduate workforce? A lot of the experience I gained, I gained as a graduate, was working with experienced colleagues in the office and just sitting in the workplace environment, which I guess this whole situation has potentially taken that away, or might morph it into something different. Who would like to maybe pick up on that one?
I'll just talk from my experiences of our practice. Obviously, in design, collaboration is absolutely fundamental to it. That kind of creativity you get when you're sitting around a table, there's a spontaneous serendipity to conversation that we're all still finding it very hard to absolutely replicate it in virtual environments. Now, saying that, there are other things that these kind of platforms really enable that actually is sort of inefficient doing it in the office. And I think that, let's not say it's going to be all one way or all the other. It's about a flexible, more dynamic way of working. You know, personally, we have a number of different teams who come into the office, work from home, and actually, you know, pastoral care, which are focused on the educational piece. We do them in the studio, and then we segregate our tasks that can be done remotely. And I think that's, you know, we all just need to think and be more analytical on a task-driven, you know, on a task basis about how we, you know, how we learn and better ourselves in the working environment.
Yeah, I would add to that it's now a specific element that requires its own attention, and I think there are ways of doing it remotely. It requires thinking in a different way, and perhaps it's sort of remote shadowing or something like that. I don't know if anyone's tried that. I haven't, but certainly be interested to give it a go. Whereas, you know, a lot of this stuff and training and learning used to happen almost by osmosis. It's the difference between sitting next to someone with years and years of experience and just listening to them on the phone. It's not just what they're saying, but actually it's how they say it. So yeah, that element is going to it's harder now, I think. Hopefully, picking up on Nick's point, we've struggled with the creativity element, particularly within design teams, and we're making efforts to get people back together again for that specific purpose. But I think, yeah, that we need to now address it as its own component of how we deal with people's training, because those opportunities have slipped away. But I think it is doable.
I completely agree. There's got to be a sort of a hybrid that we try and take on board and help facilitate for people. Another question we've had is, has the government compounded the high street problem by amending planning requirements to allow shops to be repurposed to residential units without formal application or consent requirements? I guess this kind of picks up on James, your point earlier about permitted developments, but I know, Nick, as well, you've had obviously a lot of experience in that sector. So I'll maybe put it to either of you again. Apologies, Alex and Selasi.
I'm going to let Nick lead on that one.
Well, all I would say, without getting too technical on it, a few years ago there was a call to freeze permitted development from office to residential, because it was feeling that we were losing too much town centre employment and workplace. Which, you know, if you look at successful cities, there's some really interesting research from the Centre for Cities on this. You know, prosperity comes with employment and work, density, vibrancy, all of these things that having successful, flourishing businesses in town centres encourages. And then actually retail and some of these, you know, the other, you know, playing, entertainment, these other uses can kind of come off that, not the other way around. And so there was this drive to sort of stop office being lost. In a way, now we kind of need to go back in the other direction. But I think that the crucial thing here is having a flexibility in the planning system that allows you know, these to be these individual sites to be assessed, and really importantly under a vision of a master plan. You know, I think it's becoming lots of SPDs are now 10, 12 years old, and I think each local authority, each city or town should be revisiting those kind of general plans, creating a vision for the future, and then allowing a flexibility within that to change buildings, reappropriate buildings in order to deliver a much brighter future that suits everybody.
Yeah, some really good points there. Sorry, James, do you want to?
I was just going to very anecdotal addition to that point, really, which is going to the question itself. I guess the answer is maybe in the short term in terms of what we're seeing in front of us now, but I think the question or the issue is far more complex. And picking on what Nick has said, you know, you've got to create a reason for people to go to places, and I think just to go and buy something, that reason has gone, and there is a need for a wider spatial rearrangement of areas, to make them attractive and to appeal to everybody and every need. So I wholeheartedly support what Nick said.
Thanks, guys. I'm going to go to one more and then round up with my question selfishly. Is there any concern from the panel that there is the potential to jump the gun on extreme predictions for change and the need for change only to find that we'll only return to the status quo in the next 12 to 18 months? Selasi, can I pick on you for this?
Yes, I kind of am going to cheat a little bit and answer a little bit of the previous question in this answer. I think on the permitted development topic, I think this might be a little bit of that example. I think on top of what Nick and James have mentioned, I feel like it's very important that the most vulnerable in society aren't left sort of at the tail end of any negative ramifications that might come out of something so drastic as the new direction of where it comes to permitted development. And I think it's in that assessment of you know, site-specific assessments, I think there needs to be above and beyond that a keen eye being paid to whoever is undertaking that development and making sure that people are not being left in, you know, unacceptable situations with no windows or lack of ventilation and all that kind of stuff. And that would only affect the most vulnerable in our societies. To this point about specifically about the next 12 to 18 months, I think it's about a balance, I think, and it's about that thing of flexibility. I think what's clear is that the status quo isn't the solution, isn't the answer. But it is also right that if we jump the gun, we might end up, you know, in a worse situation or a situation that doesn't work. But we won't know unless we try. I think there needs to be some room for sort of trial and error in this, but calculated trial and error, well informed, well researched. But yeah, I think it could go either way. There is definitely room for jumping the gun, and that might well be a situation we find ourselves in, but I think we need to allow room for flexibility and trial and error.
Yeah, I kind of I get where the question is coming from, but then fundamentally we're in a period of kind of huge upheaval and change at the moment, and even without kind of pandemic over the last few months, we've got, you know, massive shifts in global economic power, from trade wars to, you know, growing economies and expanding rapidly. We've got an aging population in the UK. We've got new technology adoption every year, changing, you know, which businesses are successful, how we go about our daily lives. We've got, you know, the evolving kind of role of globalization, and be that populations, be that companies and products, like all of these things are just hugely evolving topics that all intersect and make it a really complex world to make business decisions. And I think all of that added up means, yeah, there is a risk of making wrong decisions in the short term, but kind of having a view of what those shifting things might impact, what the impacts might be on, you know, on our business, on any business, is always a good thing. And if we try and think about it in kind of horizons, and having a view of kind of the long-term horizon means that we can then kind of make decisions today that can mean we benefit whatever happens as all of those things shift and change in the future. So yeah, I think the question about whether there is a risk of making bad decisions today. So I think it's about kind of understanding what the shifting landscape might look like in the long term, so that you can make short-term decisions to benefit from that.
Just to kind of re-articulate what we said right at the beginning of this conversation was, you know, these changes have been happening for a while. It's not that suddenly coronavirus has happened and revolution. You know, whilst this seems like, and it has been a drastic shock to everything that we thought was the way of life 6 months ago, actually the trends and the responses from a built environment perspective have been happening, and this could be that point in time to deliver on it. I think also when we make predictions, we always look forward and backwards. You know, don't forget that in the 1950s, in response to a health issue, i.e. huge pollution in London, and an enabler, which was better railways and opportunity to commute, city centres emptied and the suburbs boomed. Here we are today. There's another health issue in COVID, and another enabler in the internet. I think there are shifts in the way we think we can do things, and each time we learn lessons and how to better them. And I personally feel that right now is a real, could be a kind of period of real, golden age of urban renewal, where we can start to right some wrongs that happened through, the 80s and 90s and many of our early careers, where huge redevelopment of town centres into, say, just retail or very monolithic places. I think we potentially lost out on some of those, building proper sustainable future cities.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you kind of go, how can we undo but not completely redo at the same time? And with that in mind, we've got a little bit of time left, so I'd like to end with a question for all of you. What do you think has been the most positive things that have come out of the COVID-19 crisis, and where would you like to see these opportunities emerge from the current situation in our industry? I'll start with James.
Thanks, Nancy. Yeah, I've sort of given this question a bit of reflection to think about what have been the real positives, and there are many. But I think for me, what I have enjoyed experiencing and partaking in, and I'd like to see carry forward, is, in a word, collaboration. I think we've seen it on a social level in the way that everyone has sort of pulled together and helped each other in a very difficult time, which is a lovely thing to participate in, but also on a professional level, obviously working like in a digital format the way that we are now is challenging, and that's required a lot of people to be a lot more collaborative in the way that they approach their work and day-to-day lives. I think it's also we've covered across. Sorry, we've covered it many times in the conversation today, that in order to solve the issues that are ahead of us, we need to work together to do it. So for me, it's collaboration. It's a positive thing that's come out of this, and it's something we need to take forward with us.
Thank you. Selasi?
I think two main things stand out to me. On a social level, I think it's COVID-19 coupled with so many other things happening at this present moment in time has created the space for people to reflect, to kind of slow down and think about things socially, economically, in all spheres of life. And I think that has created a positive space. And that goes to a lot of different societal issues that we've been dealing with lately. It has allowed people to be more empathetic and more considerate, hopefully, going forward. And with regards to the built environment, I feel like in terms of the home specifically, I think there's an opportunity here for sort of consumers to start to dictate and demand more quality out of the homes that are being built now. I think that quality of space in terms of sustainable features, good ventilation, good space standards, and all those things are going to be quite important and going to be something that consumers of housing products are going to be demanding for, and therefore hopefully that will move the shift away from sort of more, I don't know, negative developer-led situations which don't necessarily put those that quality at the fore. I think that's quite interesting, and also the innovation. I think there's been so much space to rethink how we do things and to innovate, and I think that's amazing.
Thanks, Selasi. Nick?
Yeah, I'd absolutely echo all of those thoughts on this being a time of reflection on how we collaborate, how we live and work collectively. It's been a time of great innovation, socially and economically. I think for me, this is really about this being an opportunity for acceleration in some of these very important sort of regeneration processes that were already underway. You know, they were, in a way, there was a sort of slow degradation and almost a hollowing out of town centres. It was this long, painful death that seemed to be happening. And this is a sort of a point in time, it's a catalyst for change that I think we should all embrace and use this as a positive opportunity to, you know, think how we can better our town and city centres, the way we use them, and really instill long-term sustainability and flexibility so that they continue to prosper in the future for the next generation.
Agreed. Thanks, Nick. And last but not least, Alex.
I'll be very brief. I'm very conscious we're 1 minute over time. The positive that I'd like to see continue. Well, I think we're all creatures of habit, and we've all formed new habits over the last few weeks and months. One of those being kind of a reflection on the pace of life and our work-life balance, kind of a reassessment of priorities. Obviously not commuting as often, juggling childcare and watching co-workers do that, and you know, simple things like going on walks or working outside. And I think those are all really good things that people have enjoyed about working remotely, and that improved quality of life is something that we should, I think, definitely look to retain. And I think as a sector, if we can reflect all of those good things in the places we provide and build, then I think that'd be a great thing. You know, fundamentally, our cities have now got to compete with the ability to work and shop from anywhere. So if we're going to want people to come into kind of urban places or places that we develop, then we really need to think about what's the quality of life that we're going to provide for people to draw them in.
Great, thanks guys. I think hopefully everyone will agree some really insightful and thought-provoking themes and discussion points here. We've been inundated throughout the session with questions, so apologies if we didn't get to answer your question. However, if you do have a burning one, please send it through to us at nextgen@gardner.com, and our panel will hopefully respond. I'd like to thank our brilliant panel who have been great today, and of course thank also our partners, the City Property Association, Westminster Property Association, New London Architecture and REVO Hub, because without them we wouldn't have been able to have this discussion. I'm sure you'll all agree it's been a great hour and 3 minutes with much to take away on what the future of the industry might look like. The session has been recorded and it will be published on G&T's website along with a newsroom article about the event. So please keep an eye out for future communications across our social media channels. On behalf of G&T, I'd like to thank you all for tuning in, and hopefully we'll see you all at the next one.